අනුගණනය කී සද්දේ ඇහෙනවා. දැන් මේක පටන් ගත්තා.
그냥 지원지네. 그냥.
And welcome to the audience. I'm going to ask you to bear with me for just a moment while we get everything set up. Apologize for the delays, folks. And there we are. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone, and thank you, Avital, for joining us today. This is a career masterclass in building an effective engineering team. We have an expert in the subject, Avital Arora, here today, and I'm going to introduce her in just a moment. But first, I'd like to introduce the controls for WebEx. Please enter your questions for Avital in the Q&A box. We will be putting those together and just checking one thing. We'll be logging those for the Q&A at the end of the session. If you use the chat, please address it to all panelists so that she can see it. Otherwise, it just comes to me, and that's not as helpful as you might think. My name, by the way, is Stuart Creek. I'm a marketing manager here at Simplilearn, and am going to set up our first poll question. We'll have several poll questions of you in the audience, and to do that, first one is very basic. It's how much experience do you have in the audience here? And we'll give you about 30 seconds to answer that question. If you are watching on live stream or on YouTube, you can put your answers into the comments. This is the poll question here. And I will share with you the result. Okay, we have a very experienced audience today. About half of the people here responded that they have 10 years more experience. And we do ask a second question about how you're doing today because of the worldwide situation, pandemic. It's good to see that most people are doing okay or better than okay. And we hope that this webinar helps to improve your outlook. So with that, I'm going to introduce Avital and we'll get started. So Avital Arora is a VP of software development at Salesforce, and she leads the development of several Sales Cloud products, which are, of course, integral to the success of Salesforce. She's led engineering teams for storage management, for storage operating systems, for application development, and she's been on both sides of acquisition, both as a acquirer and acquiree in terms of integrating engineering teams. We're very pleased and fortunate to have her here today. Welcome, Avital.
Thank you so much for having me, Stuart, and Simplilearn. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. So we can go right into it and ask a question about the effectiveness of engineering teams. What is an effective engineering team? And while you're considering that question, I'll queue up the second poll for the audience. You wanted to ask them what kind of a team they would prefer to work with.
Yeah, I wanted to hear from folks. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Stuart, there's a little bit of delay in your audio, but I hope everyone can hear me okay. And the reason I pose this question as I think about effective teams, what do we think is an effective engineering team? Is it one that meets every commitment that they set out to, that they were asked to do? Or is it one that sets these stretch goals, sometimes doesn't meet them, but they're trying very hard? Like, what team do you want to work with? So something to consider. We'll look forward to your answers. In my perspective, an effective engineering team is one that actually understands how their work fits into the larger company strategy, and then is willing to switch gears when the business needs, right? Whether you're at a startup or a big company, responding to changing market trends is one of the biggest competitive advantages. And that sometimes decides, it's the difference between winning and not winning. I won't say losing, but winning and not winning. And the other part of an effective engineering team is whether you're a rock star engineer or you're a 10x engineer or whatever else happens, right? An effective team is one that actually works together to get things done together, right? And I'm very pleased to see the results of the poll, which says, team sets these stretch goals and doesn't sometimes may not meet them, but they're working very hard to meet them. And I think the point really here is that an effective engineering team understands the why. They know that some goals are sacred and they cannot be missed, right? If we've committed something to a board or something to a customer, those really should not be missed. But they're also adaptable. They're looking at these market trends and they're saving some buffer for innovation and for stretch goals so that when we have the opportunity, we can get to them. But about these stretch goals, I mean, it's great to have them, but it's super important to communicate about what's happening, right? Left, right, up, down, whichever direction. It's very important to communicate how these stretch goals are going. And then the last but not the least, as we're working towards these sacred goals or these stretch goals, we're working together as a team, and we're working, as a team which is interdependent on each other. That's also very important for an effective engineering team.
Okay. One of the greatest things about the era we live in is how quickly things change. So, how does effectiveness relate to agility and the ability to pivot to new priorities, new projects, or new products?
Absolutely, that is a centerpiece of effectiveness, right? So let's say we're working on this product and we see the market change. I mean, the pandemic has taught us so many things, right? So many teams were working on a set pattern. I'll give you my own experience. We at Salesforce, are part of Sales Cloud, and our goal is to make salespeople more productive. And we do this with various tools and products. And as the pandemic hit us, we realized that every sales rep is no longer like, there's sales reps are known to go out, meet people, go dining, wine, and all of that became impossible with the pandemic. And every rep became an inside sales rep. And hence conducting effective meetings on Zoom or WebEx or whatever other tool became the most important things. And we quickly had to pivot to change our products around slightly to make sure that we were addressing that need. So I think, as I was saying, that is the most important thing for a team to be able to recognize their goals and pivot as and when needed.
Okay. And you talked about interdependence and the ability of team members to work together, but we also talked about how team members need to be independent, self-starters, responsible for their own productivity. How do those two dynamics relate?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, Stuart. That's a great point because, especially when we're early in our careers, we're trying to focus on how to become independent, right? The good team member is one who can independently get things done. And that's sort of the first mark of, okay, you've been successful in your first engineering role. But as you grow, you realize that it's not just about what you do, right? Like I may start a company on my own. I may build, test, deploy. I've got this app going, great. Eventually, very few companies are one people companies, right? So now I decide I want to build a small team. And of course, I'm thinking about the top talent. I want to hire really smart people. And now I've got a few people, and very quickly their roles start to emerge, right? Somebody's really good at deployment. Somebody's very good at the front end. Somebody's really solid at the file systems piece. And soon, if you're doing well, hopefully you're expanding that out into teams of these specialties. There's a front end team and a back end team. And now the key thing here, the difference between winning and losing is actually how these teams work well together. Regardless of the team size, whether you're, small teams or large, how these teams trust one another, foster true teamwork where they're not about to like throw things over the wall, but when you're building the culture of building things together is super important in an effective team.
I'm asking the audience, by the way, see the connections. Can you hear me speaking? If you put in the chat, because I know that Avital is hearing the questions I'm asking. Yeah, we're seeing that. Good. Some can and some cannot. Okay.
We can hear you, but your audio is not great, Stuart. Your audio is a little, yeah. Seems to be some noise.
I apologize for that, and I'm not sure how to fix that, but let's just go on. So we talk about culture. You know, when you mention building a team, now you have the interactions of people with one another, and by definition, that creates a culture. So the slogan "Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast" tells us how much things have changed in business thinking, and why we put such an emphasis on it. But how do we know if the culture that we have is the right one for our business? And how would we know that it's right? What are the metrics, the parameters that we decide a culture is right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're talking about effective teams. The same question is asked of effective companies, right? So this is one of those $1 million questions, like you said, Stuart, that doesn't have a great, like it doesn't have one answer, right? Ultimately, I'll say that teams usually have a culture, and that culture is throughout the organization. It's the job of leadership to make sure that culture is pervasive throughout the organization. For example, Facebook is known for, build fast and break things. And that ultimately, if you believe in that, that ultimately helps you decide when you're having to make a big decision about should I do X or Y, that cultural tenet helps you decide which way to go. And, over time, they've obviously changed that. But like, there are key things, customer importance, importance of innovation, importance of moving fast, importance of security and availability. Those things are culturally, set from the top, which is great. I've learned that as leaders, whether you're an architect or an engineering manager or a VP or a leader, you have to absorb and figure out what is unique about your team. Yes, you follow the company's cultural tenets, obviously. How do you build that uniqueness in your team? And for me, at least I've felt like there's 3 or 4 things that I value the most, and I try to make pervasive across my team. Number 1 for me is psychological safety. We talked about, this is an effective team. For a team to work together, they've got to be able to count on each other. They've got to be able to take a few risks, and it's okay to fail. They've got to be able to reach out across to their team and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. This is not necessarily the right path. How do we, help me work through this? They should be able to be vulnerable and admit that they don't know and they want to learn, right? So having that psychological safety, building that trust, I think is number 1 across a team. An equally important thing is valuing diversity. And, we talk about gender and race as the topics of diversity most of the time, but it's not just that, right? It's age, it's background, it's diversity of thoughts. It's valuing and listening to every member on the team and making sure that input is counted, because that's actually what makes teams better. The third thing I really value is strong ownership. Just last night, actually, we had a production issue, and an engineer pinged me because they needed some approvals, and we got on a call, and over the course of the 2 hours that we were on the call, 3 other engineers joined to help us all figure all of this out. It was a pretty complex problem. And 3 of the 4 engineers on the call had nothing to do with the code. Like, they had not written that code. They were not part of it, but they joined because they felt like they had knowledge of the product and how this could impact other pieces. And, we got it figured out late at night. We got it solved. It's all good. The point that sticks with me and I want to bring up now is that ownership. right? Which is, yes, I wrote the code, so I'm going to go figure this out. But also, yeah, I didn't write this code, but this impacts an area, or I have the opportunity to influence something where, oh, I know about this area, so I'm going to jump in and help, no matter what, who wrote it. There's no blame. Actually, all we talked about it. We've got the fix in. I still don't know actually who wrote the code. It's not the engineer who brought it to my attention, and that's the part that's not important. It's not important who wrote it. It's that ownership across the team of, we're going to make this right for our customers. Right. So that is super important. And last but not the least, I think the thing that's important about a culture is the culture of continuous learning. We all make mistakes. How do we learn? How do we come out of that stronger and not make that same mistake again? There'll be a different mistake we'll make again. So, for me, it's four things. It's psychological safety, diversity and valuing it, truly valuing it, ownership, and continuous learning. I think those make a very, very strong culture for an engineering team.
Right. I think psychological safety is one of the big trends that emerged, I think, in the last couple of decades. And the culture of no blame is so important in an engineering environment. It actually came out of aviation, if you're aware of that, because it was from root cause analysis of airline crashes that the principle of let's find cause and not assign blame became important, and it's pervaded healthcare, where no blame is a tenet of healthcare delivery and nursing, and as you mentioned in engineering. So the notion, the example you used of a team coming together to solve a problem, and people contributing, whether they were the author of the problem or just had the expertise to solve it. That's a great model for an engineering, any endeavor of people cooperating.
Yeah.
So, and continuous learning is also very near and dear to the hearts of us here at Simplilearn. So we want to go on to the next question, which is, what are some of the metrics of effectiveness? And I'm going to put up that as a poll. So if you'll bear with me, I'll start the poll.
While you're starting the poll, Stuart, if I may, I'll take one of the questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A in the chat, and that is, to make an engineering team effective, you said we should understand the needs and expectations of current demands, but top management has the ultimate authority to set up the strategies. What if I'm not good enough? So despite good enough understanding consumers, what if I'm not good enough to convey the information to top management? What should I do? It's questions from Gotham. Great. It's a really solid question, Gotham, because you're right. Like, sometimes we don't have the access we need to the top management. And I think the best thing you can do in that case, I would recommend two things. One, I've found that sometimes, putting together a little demo or a hackathon kind of thing, which you put together and show, right? Because slides and words and documents will convey things, but sometimes if you show something saying, here's the problem, here's a creative way to solve it, I think that has an impact. And of course, you'll have to take it up the levels of your chain, but I think that has a really solid impact of showing. And the other is actually working, you're an engineer working with your product management or basically your peers who are helping convey that strategy. Convey that, right? Again, make a solid, whatever's your best mode of communication, document, PowerPoint, or a demo, and take that to your product managers and explain how, and get some partnership on that. Take it to your manager, like take it to people who may have more influence in the organization than you would be my best advice. And Stuart, we'll go to your poll.
Yep. And here is the result of the poll. So because there were more than one answer allowed, it adds up more than 100%, but team velocity was the one that was chosen by most people.
So again, this is a great question, because you can see the reason for this question really is that as an engineering leader and there are many, many different things that we can do for effectiveness. Like, what do you want from your engineering leader can be multiple things. And ultimately, your engineering, the engineering leader has to put on different hats at different times. Whether you're an architect or a people manager, you should know what your team needs from you. And this poll was very illustrative of a certain team may need a certain thing and another may need something completely different. So number one, you should be able to wear those different hats. And if you can't, you should be aware enough that maybe this is the hat I cannot wear, so I'm going to very clearly ask someone else to play this role. Right? I'm going to either delegate that or ask for help. But number one, understanding what the team needs and then executing to that is a huge, huge part of what an engineering leader does.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's a general model of a servant leader, right? Somebody who takes the position of leadership from the perspective of what can I do to help my team succeed.
Yes.
So that's an important aspect of the philosophy of leadership.
Yeah. Sorry, Stuart, I can say a little bit more on that, right? So I've been in situations, I'll give you an example, where there was one time we had this acquisition, and the team had a React Native app, and the acquired team had a full native app built on Java and Swift, right? And the discussion was, where do we go from here? And we had to make a technical decision. We spent a lot of time discussing this and figuring out the answer, right? So there was that time needed solid technical leadership. That's what it needed. We got it done. There's been other times where it's been about process. And so I guess I would argue that an engineering leader, be it an architect or a people leader, really the biggest job you do is to build engagement. So let me talk about this a little bit. What does engagement look like? I'll give you an example instead of just talking. So this was a time when I was at a company where we were building a startup within a big company. We were competing with a lot of other startups. We had a lot of pressure, and we were hiring very, very quickly. And so we had to figure out who to hire and whether people we hired were happy or not. And so we decided we had taken some training. And this book I'd recommend to anybody who's thinking about leadership and engineering. It's called Love Him or Lose Him. And then there's another one called Stay Interviews. And the summary of it is that you can hire really quickly, but if you can't retain talent, then you have a really huge problem, right? And engineering skills are in high demand, so you can hire, and unless you know what motivates each person, you're not going to be able to retain them for long. So we did this thing that we called Stay Interviews, which was, with each person, the question was, what are your top motivating factors? And how are we doing towards those factors? So let's say a factor is money, and I want to get promoted, career growth, and I want, a good work-life balance because, right now my work-life balance is not great. So those are my top motivating factors. This is what keeps me in a job. And money, you're paying me okay, it's fine, but really I'm looking for career growth right now. Or that I feel like we're not meeting customer demand. So whatever, right? We got all of this feedback. And from that, we were able to assess where the team was and where we needed to, were there some really overall systemic problems? Like, were we seeing career growth as a systemic problem that we needed to go address? Or was money a systemic problem? And then what are the individual issues we needed to address? So we actually got a lot of data out of this. And I'll summarize this by saying that we find, and there's a lot of research on this, that there's three things at a high level that motivate people. It's rewards, it could be economic incentives, which is, just pure money. But it could also be things like, what am I learning? What am I getting done? Like, getting things done is a big, big motivator for people. And, this team moves too slowly. They don't get things done. We're not moving blockers fast enough. So that's an incentive. The second key high level area is respect, which is, we talked about psychological safety. We talked about taking risks, but do people feel like they're getting the respect? Are they able to connect with customers and show people what they've done and get that industry-wide respect in a community to say, this person is the expert at React Native, for instance, right? So it's just the building that you are the person, and then, building that respect among people. And the third thing is the sense of purpose, which says, a sense of ownership. How does my work fit into the larger whole? How do we decide where we're going? And, Avital, yesterday you made the decision about React Native or full native. How do I take that on? So how do I grow such that tomorrow I'm the person taking on that responsibility of making that decision? So at those three levels, if you recognize what people need, and if you're able to make that happen for your larger team, individually and your larger team, that starts to build an effective team. That starts to build engagement in your team.
It's very interesting because people, the psychology model is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we go from the very bottom, which is you need to have food and shelter and physical security, to the very top, which is self-actualization, which gets to the point that you were making of, if I'm doing work as part of a team, is the team accomplishing something that I can then point to and say, I was part of that? And will I be able to make that claim that says, I was part of that and I have an ownership of that great result that came out of it? So those are important motivating factors, but I really like the idea of the stay interview, of an ongoing temperature gauge of what are we doing well and not well as a group, as an organization, in order to meet your needs as an engineer, especially in a time when engineering talent is still at such a premium. You talked about, well, we talked about the different metrics. Can you go into a little more about how you balance those? Because I pointed out one of them as, oh, this is the one that most people look at, but you put up, the set of metrics for a reason. So
Yeah. And sorry, we mixed up these questions. Sorry, Stuart, I couldn't hear you very clearly.
oh,
So
I'm just saying
let's check.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the question is, how do you balance the importance
Yeah.
of metrics, because you can't just pick one and focus on it exclusively.
Absolutely. So absolutely agree. So coming to metrics, right? First things first, I'll say that we're engineers. We'll find a way to outsmart any metric that you put in front of us, right? If you measure me by how many story points I get done, I'll start ignoring the bugs. If you start story pointing the bugs, I'll spend less time on mentoring engineers, junior engineers, or spending less time on peer review so I can focus on the story points and the bug points, right? If you compare one team versus another based on just team velocity, we'll start inflating story points, and then we'll have higher velocity. So I've often found that looking at any of these individual metrics and then rewarding people based on those metrics, I find that results in long-term in bad behavior. Effective teams, according to me, set outcomes. I mean, we set goals based on outcomes and deliverables and overall results, not just the amount of work being done, right? So I personally don't look at velocity. So yeah, sure, we track these metrics, but ultimately we don't look at velocity. I don't look at velocity just for execution, but I look at velocity for overall, how is the team doing? So for instance, is this team consistently, a pull request taking too long? And a pull requests taking too long to be reviewed because people are overwhelmed and they don't have time? Or are these PRs too complex? And we just need to have a culture of making the PR smaller so that people can make the time to review them. Are the automated tests failing too much due to flakiness? And is that the problem that's causing other problems, right? How often is master read, or is a team locked out? We have this concept of, if you have any open security bugs, the team is locked out from making any PRs because any check-ins, because we want to get those security defects addressed first. So is the team often locked out, or is master often read? And are we addressing the underlying cause so that we get becoming more effective? Are we going back and forth on requirements with PM and UX because we're not getting requirements clearly, and we're not doing sort of a definition of ready before we start actually executing? We just start executing and then we go back and forth and back and forth. So measure that. How much code is being written, rewritten, and refactored, right? One of the metric we look at is, what is the ratio of tech debt to innovation, release over release? So, every team over time will accumulate some tech debt, but is that changing to the point that we're doing way too much tech debt and not enough innovation, or vice versa? So we're not paying attention to both sides, of the house. These are super important metrics that you can look at them as a whole and actually start to make a difference. One other metric that I know will seem a little may seem surprising is happiness and well-being. Does the team enjoy working together? Do they make time for casual conversations? Is this a team because they like to work together? Will they stick through thick and thin? Or is this a transactional team that just and that's okay. That may be okay for a short amount of time, but really how do you measure that, by the way? Again, many ways to do it. One way is simply during your sprint, end of sprint, just do a quick poll, just like you do story pointing, 1 to 5, however people do story pointing. Do a quick poll. How are things going? And you will start to get a sense of the team is not very happy together. What do we do about that? So I look at these kinds of metrics: velocity, not just for sprint execution, but velocity of overall our cycle time, overall tech debt, and happiness. I think those metrics really make a difference in team effectiveness.
Yeah, and happiness is not such a surprising or unusual metric, because a team that doesn't work together smoothly is not going to accomplish nearly as much or with nearly as high quality as a group of people who enjoy working together and enjoy helping each other. So it's a very important metric. So I'm going to bring up one more poll. This is the last one before we in this part of the discussion. And this is when you wanted to ask the audience about what they want from their engineering leader. So what is the one thing, pick one of these 5 that you would want your engineering leader to give you right now? Avital made this a single answer question to force you to make a priority choice.
Yeah, I really wanted to get a sense for what does this audience think?
And here's the result.
The results are pretty interesting, not surprising. And I think the thought I'd have here is, does your engineering leader know that, right? And they need to be asking you this question. So this is actually illustrative of, as an engineering leader, what should we be doing? And so many times, again, as managers or architects, we're running around trying to solve a problem where we may be saying, I think there's a problem here. We need to add more people because there's not enough people on the team. But in reality, the team is saying there's lots of cross-team blockers. It's not like I have enough people on the team, but we have these cross-team dependencies that are not getting met. And just remove these blockers and then we'll be okay. Or the team is saying, I have the people, but we're struggling with decisions about which way to go architecturally. And what we need is really technical guidance, right? And you saw that in the results. I hope everyone saw that there was a pretty good split between, I thought, technical guidance, remove a cross-team blocker, and feedback about how I'm doing. And to be an effective leader, the point I'm trying to illustrate here was, different teams need different things at different times. The number one thing you can do as a leader is ask the question, is what can I do for you today, this week, this month, and then help solve that problem. Because if you don't, you could be running up around doing something completely different.
Okay. And that makes perfect sense, in the sense that if you don't know to ask about what potential problems there are, you'll never see the problem. You'll never be able to solve the problem. And you'll get blindsided when somebody comes to you and says, I'm leaving because you never did this. And your thought will be, but you never asked me. So,
but it's the leader's job to ask, right? Don't wait to be told.
exactly.
Ask.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the role of an engineering leader? What is I mean, if you're going to summarize it, how would you create the job description for the engineering leader here?
I'll say it. I'll summarize it very quickly because we've talked about this through the talk. I don't want to repeat, but it's two things, right? Ask what the team needs and figure out how to solve that, either yourself or by getting in help. Right? If you don't know how to solve these cross-team blockers, get in somebody who can. Ask your manager for help if you can. So number one, figure out what the team needs, and number two, drive the engagement in the team so that the team is working together. The team has what they need to be successful.
Um, so when we talk about building a team, there's the initial assembly, as you talk about your example of, so I'm the one person startup, but I need to have people help me to achieve launch. But then what happens when you scale up? When you double, you triple, you raise by a factor of 10?
Yeah. There's entire books written on scaling. So, Stuart, I'm certainly not going to be able, can have a whole discussion on that. I think, the first thing is, congratulations, whatever you've been doing, it's been recognized by your leaders, your customers, and now they want you to do more of it. So take a minute to pat yourself and your current team on the back and say, hey, we're growing. And that's an awesome thing. Right? And then, right behind that, recognize that what got you here won't get you to your next goal. Right? And start formulating a plan for this growth. I learned this, again, I was building this startup within a big company, and we were 18 people when in the beginning, and we used to have this really good process of we used to meet 2 times a week. We'd get together with pizza. We'd talk about technical decisions that were pending, the ones that were made, communicated, made sure everybody knew what was going on, and then off we went. And 2 days later, we got back together, did the same thing. It was great, and we moved really quickly. And we found that literally when we got from 18 to 30, that same thing didn't work anymore, right? Because people in the back of the room couldn't hear. Somebody didn't like the pizza, so they want to get their own lunch, and so they missed the meeting. I mean, for good reasons and all kinds of reasons, they didn't scale. That there wasn't a need for 30 people to be in that same room at the same time making decisions. 30 people didn't need to make that decision, and so we started to break the team down into smaller chunks and say, okay, this team's responsible, like accountability for each area. And we found that that made people a little bit mad because these folks who were used to being in every decision now weren't, and they felt disempowered, and that was horrible. That was not the intention at all, right? And so I quickly learned that a big part of leadership and effective leadership in teams is communication, which is how do you create a process for code reviews, for technical decisions, for hiring? Who are you trying to hire? How do you make sure that scales? Because what worked for 18 doesn't work for 30, does not work for 100, and certainly doesn't work for 200, right? So how do you scale that, and how do you communicate that clearly? How do you decide that the hiring process should be the same for this set of 30 people and then this other set of 50 people? Maybe it shouldn't, right? But two things there: be purposeful. Don't let this happen to you. Figure out what the problem is and get ahead of it, and be purposeful about what you're doing. And equally important, actually I'd say more important, communicate that. Communicate what the problem was, why you solved, like how you solved it, and what you're doing to solve it, and why those decisions were made. Clear communication is key during scaling.
Yeah. We have the management principle of span of control. And when you talk about how many people an individual can lead at once directly, um, you have to then start saying, well, we get past that point, we have to find ways to lead them indirectly. And so you talk, as you said, breaking teams into groups, but how do you make sure that the message translates both going down from the top to all the groups and coming up from the groups back to the top? Channels of communication, and making sure people have ways to feel heard and understand why their input was either taken or rejected, but it was always heard. And those are all very, very important aspect. So for a company that is, in the mode of hiring right and left because they're growing at a, exponential rate, what are some of the common mistakes that they should look out for?
That's a great question. I'll tell you all the mistakes I've made. Lots of them, right? I think the biggest mistake, I think, is if you hire people just like you, right? It's very easy for us to, we've got this mold of what's made me successful. So, just hire people just like me. And we don't do this consciously. I'm not saying I'm looking for this, but unconsciously, it's very easy to hire people just like us. Very classic example of this, which has nothing to do with race or gender or anything else, is long ago Google, when they built the iOS YouTube app, they found that when they first released it, they found that a lot of videos were being posted upside down. They were confused, like, why would people post upside down videos? It makes no sense. And they realized, and they'd done a lot of testing, so they didn't know what was going on, but after a lot of debugging, they found that left-handed people were basically, because the person's view of the landscape is the other way, they just hadn't tested that, and all these videos showed up upside down. And what this tells you is they didn't have any left-handed people in their development or QA team. Now, the point here is actually very simple, which is you need diversity on your team, and hiring people just like you won't be the best answer. Now, I'm hiring left-handed people, right-handed, there's tons of kinds of diversity. So this is a very creative example to show that, again, diversity should be top of mind while hiring. I think so that's number one, just far and away, number one is diversity. The other mistake that we often make is we don't set clear expectations, right? When we hire somebody, we're, in this sell mode, we're telling them, here's what you can do, here's how you can grow, great, right? But when a person joins, they need to know what is their 90-day goal. And oftentimes this gets lost in the larger goals. And I think setting the very, very clear expectation of what does success look like helps people succeed quickly. The opposite of this is, by the way, also very true and is a common mistake we make while scaling, which is sometimes we're too prescriptive. We say, well, here is exactly what we want you or the team to do. And that is also a problem because we don't empower people enough then, right? You put them in a corner, you say, here's what you go solve, and then they're waiting for that next problem to be solved. So I think you got to find the balance between giving people clear goals, but not being too prescriptive. You have to find the right balance when you hire people in a new team.
Okay.
The other thing, sorry. Okay. The other thing is, we talk often about, and Netflix has this whole culture deck they do, right? Where you don't want to hire brilliant jerks. And I think this is super important because if you hire somebody brilliant, but they're not a team player, we talked, Stuart, about, interdependence and building a team. And if you have people who are really smart, but are not willing to work as a team, that causes problems. So best thing is figure out whether this person is a team player, through your interview process. And the last thing I'll say is, the big mistake you can make is if you ignore attrition. If you'll do exit interviews and you'll say, well, why did this person leave? What can we fix? But why not do the stay interviews that I talked about earlier? Why not figure out what motivates people so you can retain the people instead of, letting them go and having to replace them?
You touched on a number of great points, especially since I'm left-handed. I especially enjoyed the YouTube example. But the other one that rings true with me is about not hiring brilliant jerks, because I've worked in a number of situations where there's that one guy who does something really, really, really well. And you have to ask yourself, is it really worth the amount of friction he creates in the rest of the team? So
Yep.
that's a really important point.
Yep.
When you look at the organization, I think this will be the last question before we get to Q&A, but when you look at organization structure, how do we decide what is the right way to organize an engineering team?
Yeah, this is often debated in organizations, small and large, Stuart, and I've been part of these debates myself. And again, there's not a great answer, but there's two very strong things to consider, right? Sometimes what you do is form a team around a product where the product is key. So especially after you have product market fit, you're in a small company or large, you have product market fit, you know this is the product you want to build. You go organize a team around a product and give that team ownership of that product and say, go build this thing, right? And then you hire people around that product. The other way to do it is more common in companies trying to do a lot of innovation, ground up, smaller companies. It's around hiring around people. Like you have not brilliant jerks, but people who are actually good team players, but team players. But you hire around these people, and these people will go pivot. Like they will go from one project to the other. This set of people will be able to accomplish amazing things, right? And so they become like what we call the sniper team, where anytime there's something really hard to go solve, you go get them to start solving it, and they will figure it out. And I think organization structures work best when they blend the two, right? Consider both, blend the two, have a little bit of both. I feel like that's the best.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've heard other terms for the sniper team, like the skunk works, the troubleshooting team, and that type of thing. But yeah, the a flying squad of experts is
Yep.
important to have, but they're the people who fix things rather than get the bulk of the work done. So, like
Yep.
you said, it's important to balance that. We're at the point where I'd like to ask some of the questions from the audience.
Do you
And
want me? Do you want me to go through them, Stuart, myself, or did you want to go through?
no, I'll go through because we won't have time to do all of them, and I want to make sure that we capture a few of them. We do have one question about somebody who's a developer, a very skilled developer. Um, is that somebody who could his particular question is whether he could transfer those skills to ethical hacking.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many companies, including where I'm at now, like lots of companies that have security teams that actually want to hack their own products as a way of preventing that hacking coming from outside, right? So ethical hacking is absolutely a thing now where we call them the red team, the blue team. You know, we have these different teams, and I'll tell you how we do it. We actually have teams that will put together these hacks that they are going to deploy against all of us as employees, and they want to see which of them work, which don't, which is in our code, but it's also which is in our behavior, because a lot of security hacks today happen not necessarily in code, but in just phishing and human behavioral impacts, right? And so there are teams that will have these teams that are hidden, but their job is absolutely ethical hacking. Go for it. Very, very highly sought after skill right now.
Excellent. We have a question from Hari, and I'm going to paraphrase this question a little bit, but he asks, how do you get a team to self-organize into the agile environment if they're resisting change and seeking to find ways to blame other causes for not taking this up? How do you manage that kind of cultural transition?
Yeah, I think, you know, if I were a manager or a scrum master of this team, I would really dig in to find out, is the larger team resisting some change, or is this an individual? And usually, you know, I like to think of a team, not an individual. But sometimes in problems such as these, you want to know, is there systemically something where the team is saying, look, here's, you know, we used to do things over 6 months and this was our process, and now you're trying to get me to convert into these 2 week sprints and it won't work because, where is it a team thing or an individual thing? And then you address it accordingly. If it's a team, by the way, some of these concerns are bound to be genuine. They're not frivolous. I mean, these are all smart people. So it is about sitting down with the team. And again, it, you know, to me, it's going back to the why, right? Why are we trying to do this transformation? How does that tie into the business goals? And how do these teams then feel like, you know, make the bridge, right? We want to make this transition. The team is resisting it. list out, just like your root cause analysis we talked about, right? What are
Yes.
the issues? And let's address each of them, right? Let's not ignore them. And on the other side, maybe there's one person who's not bought in and sort of is being the bad apple and influencing the rest. And then, there are ways to address that. Maybe many ways to address that one for individual. But I think just again, digging into team versus individual is super important in something like this.
Javier asked for clarification on what psychological safety means.
Great question. Psychological safety is the ability for someone to be themselves, to be vulnerable, to take the risks, to succeed regardless of basically, there's no wrong or right? When you're an engineer on a team, you are a team member, just not necessarily just an engineer, a team member, you are part of this larger organization that is trying to achieve a goal. How do you put yourself out there, be yourself, who you are, and succeed, right? Without worrying about where you come from, what your background may be, what your age may be, gender, just feel safe to do your best.
Excellent. So what is the one question, the most effective question that you can ask your team to gauge their progress?
One question to gauge their progress.
Yeah, what's the most effective question?
Yeah.
Is what he was asking.
I would ask the team, are you where you expected to be? And are you where you wanted to be? Because expected is, again, there's the expected goal, but wanted will also imply, did you hit your stretch goal? So sorry, it's not one question, it's sort of one and a half, but I would ask the team, how do they gauge their own progress? Because, the team is usually the hardest critic of themselves, usually.
Okay. So here are a couple of related questions. Malcolm asks, can you give insights on the way to find team members' strengths and weaknesses and how to address those so that you fix the weaknesses and build the strengths?
Yeah, we've done this in the past in two ways, right? One is to get the team to actually self-assess first. Individuals, and this is soft skills and technical skills, both. You can do the same exercise for both, which is do a self-assessment, right? And then do a peer assessment. And your peer assessment is always anonymous. I'm not saying Stuart said Avital's really bad at X, Y, Z. That's not what we're trying to do at all.
I didn't say
But just kidding. I'm just picking on you, Stuart, because I can. There's nobody else to pick on. I can't see anyone else. But really, it's about, and that tells you, self. What do I think? What do you think? And again, the anonymous, should be across multiple people, not just one-on-one. And then you do it's data driven, and you have that conversation.
Okay. And aside from technical performance, which is sometimes even itself subjective, what are the other ways you assess whether a person's a good developer and a good fit for the team?
A lot of the things in this are going to be repeats of what I said, because, I espoused through this last 50 minutes or so, I've been saying, things important to me, which is, does this person, value others' opinion? Does this person listen? Is it just the loudest opinion, or, does this person listen to other people? Do they foster a team environment? Is it just them, or are they actually looking at their team's success as well? Do they have strong ownership? When something goes wrong, whether they did it or not, or who, doesn't matter, are they there to help support the team and make sure the team is successful? Those to me are key tenets of, is this person a good developer? Being a strong team player is part of that, being a good developer.
Here's an interesting question from Pratish, who asks, what percentage of your bandwidth is guidance and upskilling and paying attention to making your team future ready? Or do you find that usually just happens when some kind of big technological trend changes and you have to scramble to adjust to it?
No, I spend a lot of my time on the future readiness. I feel like my job is to build a team that can self-execute. And by self-execute, I don't mean kill themselves. They can just execute flawlessly to the goal, right?
Mhm.
My job is always 100% looking at what's coming in the future and how is my team getting ready towards that, which means are we training technically, but also just knowledge of the product. Sometimes knowing and understanding the business is as important as understanding the technology. I would argue that you can go to a week-long training and learn a new technology, but understanding and looking at market trends has to happen over time. So 100% of my job is figuring out where we are going from here and making sure we're getting ready for that. But I've been able to do that because I've been able to build a team that is very self-driven.
Um, Before I forget, we have a question about which books you mentioned.
Oh, there's a couple other resources I meant to talk about. So the books I talked about were the Stay interviews and Love Him or Lose Him. And Stuart, I can send you links to them that you can send out maybe. But another resource I wanted to point people to is Molly Graham's. It's called Giving Away Your Legos. I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I think that's a wonderful article that talks about scaling and about just making sure your team has empowerment to go grow. So I would also recommend that. Another book that I didn't talk about is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I would, definitely read that. It's, key there is, seek to understand before you want to be understood. Like, anyway, these are really, really good books to read.
Okay, very
I'll
good.
send those.
Yeah, we send out a follow-up email generally the next day after the event, and that includes the link to this recording of this event. But if you send me the links to those books, articles in advance, I'll put that in the email for everyone as well.
I'll be
So
happy to pick that up.
absolutely appreciate that. I think we are running out of time. I want to ask one last question that has to do with managing upward. When two questions that came in that are related. One about senior management thinks that they can motivate engineers with money, and yet they don't necessarily give engineering leaders the authority to set salaries. And the other one is about, if there's a blocker on a different team and management, you've appealed to management to say, I need you to help me address that. And they're not taking action. So both of these questions have to do with how do you manage upward within your organization?
Yeah. Both of these have answers that can get people into trouble. So use at your own discretion. I tend to find that, when it's about team blockers, I tend to find that highlighting those things in whatever level executive reviews there are gets me a lot of attention. And sometimes it gets me into trouble too. But, there's a time where you just have to escalate. You got to put your neck on the line and say, look, I've tried everything. So I would escalate through your regular channels, meetings, whatever forums. But sometimes there's an exec review where you say, I'm blocked, this thing is red. Calling yourself red is hard, but sometimes it gets the job done of people saying, oh, okay, I should pay attention to this. The money one is harder, right? The money one is always, this is this huge problem across the industry where, you're never going to have enough, is my experience. No matter how much I have to distribute to my team, it's never enough. But again, I think highlighting it and, sometimes really making a case for this person left because they had this much, of an offer outside. I don't want these other people to leave, so I need XYZ money. So sometimes you've got to use that data, which we don't want to use sometimes, but use that data, like, again, put your neck out for your team because you will need to.
Okay, those are excellent answers. I've got the last question, the exit question from one of the YouTube viewers. Raja asks, is there an approach to follow that helps make the job at hand fun? And I'm going to interpret that both as your job as an engineering leader and also making the jobs of your team enjoyable, fun for them.
I'll say two things to this. One, I rarely stay in jobs that are not fun. There are enough jobs out there. Go find one that you truly care about, right? Be passionate about it because, we we work so many hours in a day that if you're doing something that's not fun, I wouldn't do it. And trust me, there will be other jobs that pay you as much that will be fun. So don't, focus and figure it out. You'll get there. And the second question is how to make the team's job fun. I think of it the same way. Look, all our jobs, there's a certain amount of what I call run the business. You have to go do those things. They may not be the most exciting. You got to go do them. And you use the rest of your time to go do innovation, to go do cool things, whatever drives you, right? Figure out what drives your team. And for me, I found that there's a set of folks on the team who really want to be empowered. They want to go, we talked about skunk works projects earlier, Stuart. It's like, go find what motivates each person if possible, and go find things for them. One person may want a skunk works. Another person may say, what I really want because of this phase of my life right now is I really need every Friday afternoon off. Find a way to give them that, right? It's not the same answer for each person. Remember that, and make that happen for your team, and you'll be a good leader.
Right, because everybody's idea of fun is different also. Like you said, some people find fun in solving problems that no one else can solve. And some people find fun in, getting that feedback from the customer that said, you really helped me with the problem. And so it's like you said, each individual has their own motivations. This has been a really wonderful session, Avital. I'm going to apologize to everyone for the technical difficulties, especially with my audio. I really am not sure what the problem was, but I hope you've borne with us through this, and we appreciate your being here. I'm going to thank Avital especially for being here. I'm going to do one last poll of the audience about continuous learning and what it is that you feel is the most important thing or the most desirable thing for you individually to learn at this point. What would you like to learn? What skills would you like to add to your repertoire? And when would you like to do that? So I've got that poll up. I will put up
And Stuart, I'm going to drop for my next meeting. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to everybody. Hope this was useful.
And thank you so much for being so generous with your time, Avital. Thank you. Okay. Oops. This is for the benefit of people watching on streaming. These are the questions and the topics and when you'd like to do it. I'm going to show the poll results to people who are live on WebEx. And not surprising for this audience, but the largest number of responses was project management. So I will provide you with Avital's LinkedIn. You can reach out to her on LinkedIn at this address, basically avital.arora, or you can just look her up, Avital Arora Salesforce in any search engine, and it'll take you to there. I want to mention that we do have a postgraduate program in Agile. So people who are interested in project management and engineering management, this is a program in conjunction with the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And one of the interesting things about this program is that not only do you earn a certification, but you can actually transfer some of these credits. You get 3 credits that are transferable to their master's program if you choose to apply for and are admitted to that. So this is a great program, both for building your career and for positioning you for further education. And I think I've just placed a link for more information into the chat. And we'll mention that we have an upcoming digital marketing masterclass for any of you who may be involved in digital marketing or any of you who have friends who are digital marketers. Our masterclass with Matt Bailey, president of SiteLogic, will be on Thursday, August 26th, and he'll do a deep dive into some of the recent changes in Google search that affect digital marketers directly. So we hope see you join us there. Check our website for more information, and do stay in touch with us through our social channels. Our handle is @Simplilearn, and you'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We are global. We not only have offices in the United States, India, but also Singapore. And we support learners worldwide. So we hope to see you at future webinars and welcome you into the Simplilearn learning community. Again, thank you so much for your patience and for sticking with us. And as I said, we will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to this recording. Those of you who have been through the entire webinar today will also receive in a separate email over the weekend a certificate of proof of attendance. And that concludes our webinar for today.